discussion.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the DFS Army Fantasy Football Show. Today, I have the original best ball degenerate, Chris Felicetta himself. You, of course, can follow him on Twitter at Chris Felicetta. I'm your host, Flex Shane. Follow me at the Flex Network 1. Chris, we had you on a few weeks ago. I want to say it was right before the draft.
Yeah, we did a bunch. We did a pre-draft contest. A lot has changed. Quarterback ADP, I think, is the main thing that's changed. We were just talking about behind the scenes before we got started. The top three, there's been movement all across the quarterback board, but specifically the elite ones are kind of dropping a round or so. So I think that's kind of an interesting dynamic right now in the best ball streets.
We got to talk about the shift in the quarterback ADPs. We got to talk about Alexander Mattison, Dalvin Cook. Obviously, Dalvin Cook officially was released from the Vikings just yesterday. We're recording this on June 10th. We understand it's kind of the offseason, so a lot of these shows are evergreen. You can use some of these strategies, but we got to pay for some bills here, Chris, real quick. So, of course, you can check out all of our content over at dfsarmy.com, dfsarmy.com. We have our rookie rankings up there. We have our best ball rankings up there, which – man, there's been so much have shifted even in the last 10 days since I put them up that I got to go and I got to update those. So we'll get your opinions on some players and some takes on that. And then really what we want to focus on now for this show, Chris, is we want to talk about specifically best ball tournament strategy. Now, I myself, call me a coward for what it is. I typically will play in more so just the individual leagues and non-tournament type leagues over at Underdog. You, however, are, like I like to say, an aficionado
or degenerate, however nice you want to be.
Or degenerate. Listen, it's a talent, and you've done well in past years, and you're definitely a volume drafter. So some of the things we want to talk about, you and I both participated in a Poodle, which is kind of that mid-range tournament draft. So some of our plays there, as well as you were kind enough to show me some of your player shares. So I'm going to put you on the hot seat. Talk about some of your higher owned players and defend them, and then just get into it. So let's not bury the lead here. One of the guys that I really want to talk about, because I feel like I might have a divisive opinion on this, but it's Alexander Mattison. So first and foremost, I'm going to give you one of these, because you, even in this tournament here, you actually got an early share of Alexander Mattison. So for the people who are counting at home, he's going at a right around ADP of 68 right now. You got him at 79. And that ADP is creeping up. So the general public believes right now that Alexander Mattison is going to be the guy. And I'm curious what your opinion is. Like, when it's all said and done and the dust is settled, do you think that Alexander Mattison is going to be the lead dog on that team? Or are they going to go and get a little bit more veteran help?
I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if they brought in somebody like a dusty vet, like a Lenny or a Kareem Hunt, or somebody to maybe take some carries. But I think they want to give Alexander Mattison the first crack at it. He's performed well in spot duty when Dalvin's missed in the past. They gave him, I think, maybe the second biggest contract that a running back got this offseason behind Miles Sanders. So he got like pretty decent money. And he's shown versatility. He can do it in the pass game. He's a decent runner between the tackles. He's not going to be Derrick Henry, but he can get the job done. So I think they want to give him the first crack. And I think that he's probably going to settle, I would think, more in like a 5th round range, closer to like kind of the Miles Sanders type guys, or maybe Aaron Jones. So I was definitely getting some shares with the anticipation that Cook was going to get cut. And I think a lot of people were. But I don't think I'm going to be overweight at him, like compared to. I'd still rather have an Aaron Jones. I think I'd rather have Miles Sanders, maybe Dameon Pierce, if that's the range that he ultimately settles in. But I'm very happy to have a decent position on him now.
Yeah, I think that is kind of a sweet spot. So I'm looking here. He's going as RB21 right now. So right ahead of him is Dameon Pierce. It's right in that, actually, the Dalvin Cook range. It's right after Joe Mixon and Miles Sanders, which I kind of like that range. I mean, personally, though, like, I don't see any difference between a player like Isaiah Pacheco, Cam Akers, Rachaad White in that tier. So when I go up there in my rankings, I think I'm going to put him more in that level of a tier where the team itself, I mean, if you take our fantasy football lens off for a second here, Chris, I feel like the Minnesota Vikings have no idea what the hell they're doing right now. Like, to go out to get a young player like Alexander Mattison, but they're cutting all these veteran players because they're being cheap, and it just doesn't feel like they really want to contend this year. When there's this guy, what's his name? Oh yeah, his name's Aaron Rodgers. He's now
Yeah,
he's now a Jersey boy, and that division's wide open. They're
wide
basically
open. Yeah.
Detroit. It's crazy to me.
I think it's just because they're paying Kirk Cousins so much, they kind of have to do a bit of they're in a little bit of cap trouble. So it's just this is kind of like a bit of a reset year, which is weird coming off the 2 seed and like you said in a wide open division. But I like them offensively. I think
Yeah,
they were still productive. Obviously you're going to take Justin Jefferson #1, and this is like kind of one thing I wanted to talk to you about too, because a lot of people are like kind of having that debate whether it's Chase, Jefferson, McCaffrey, and I don't have a strong opinion like separating those three guys, but I'm taking Jefferson every time I get the #1 pick, because if you don't, you're not going to have any. And it's like I don't want to be a full fade on Justin Jefferson. Like you could, if you let's say you had a strong stance that McCaffrey was your guy, and you took every time in the first 3 picks you took McCaffrey, then you're going to wind up with maybe like if you even get a few fourth or fifth pick shares, you're going to wind up with like 30% McCaffrey, and you're going to have a stance. But then you're going to be a full fade on Chase and Jefferson, which is a dangerous game. So I'm just leaving that in the hands of the market, and I'm taking my Justin Jefferson whenever I get the 1 pick. And then that kind of dictates what you do your whole draft. You kind of build a Minnesota stack, maybe run it back with some Week 17 Green Bay Packers, who I think are a little undervalued. Like I'm not like certain that Love is going to suck, and if he's
yeah.
at least functional, I think there's some guys on that offense that'll provide good value relative to where they're going.
Yeah, it's really tough to tell whether or not the Packers trying to move on from Aaron Rodgers was more of a fatigue thing or more of a belief in what Jordan Love can actually do and lead this team. And I mean, look, they're trying to surround him with talent. They're trying to set him up to succeed. And listen, like I've had this rant before on the show where the reason that they weren't surrounding Aaron Rodgers with talent was because Aaron Rodgers was the talent. He was
Yeah,
he was the tide that rose all boats. Whereas Jordan Love isn't that guy. How do you
no,
succeed with these young, or he's not a rookie, but these younger quarterbacks? You surround him with a strong supporting cast. So to me, that makes a lot of sense. And I really like what you said there. Where listen, Justin Jefferson, all things being equal, if you could choose your pick, maybe you wouldn't choose him 1-on-1 all the time. If you had say 50 or 100 chances at that one spot, you diversify it. But that's not how it works. It's randomized. So when
yeah,
you do get that one spot, you have to smash the button on Justin Jefferson, because if you're at the 2, if you're at the 3, you might get Christian McCaffrey, you might get Jamar Chase, and then that way you can diversify your team, especially when you're doing volume drafting like what you do. But let's get into your team, shall we? Let's talk
let's
about it.
do
Let's
it.
talk about it. So this was a Poodle team that you drafted, and I quite like your team. We were texting what was going on, and it's funny. Both you and I were a little tepid about how our teams were going, but sometimes you have to just trust the process. And I like
Yeah,
how they turned out. But let's talk about your team first. So you ended up going with a build of 2 quarterbacks, 5 running backs, 8 wide receivers, and 3 tight ends. And the reason you went with just 2 quarterbacks, I presume, is because you went early. You got Lamar Jackson right at the ADP at the time at pick 31. Then you got Aaron Rodgers coming back at running back position. You took the plunge on Bijan Robinson, baby. So you got Bijan Robinson, J.K. Dobbins, Alexander Madison, and an absolute steal value now, Devon Achane and Chase Brown. And then at wide receiver, you got Jalen Waddle, who, man, he's going to be so solid every single year. Jerry Jeudy, Jordan Addison, Odell Beckham. So you got a stack there with Lamar, Jalen Hyatt, Donovan Peoples-Jones in Cleveland, Marvin Jones, Mecole Hardman for that Aaron Rodgers stack. And then at tight end, now this is, I think, one of the best values of the draft here. You got Darren Waller. His ADP at the time was 79. You got him at pick 90. That's an
yeah,
absolute steal, man. And then you came back with Tyler Conklin, another little Aaron Rodgers stack, and then followed by Trey McBride, who he's the #1 tight end in Arizona, man. I get that Arizona's going to be a bit of a dumpster fire, but people are just out on Trey
I think
McBride.
there's a lot of targets that have been vacated with Hopkins gone. Like we've never really seen Hollywood Brown stay healthy for a full season.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like Rondell Moore is like a terrible track record of health. So I could see, and McBride has the draft pedigree. He came on late a little bit last year. Like he's a guy that I love as like an 18th round pick. I specifically like him in Eagle stacks, like that Week 17 run back. If I want a little piece of the of the Cardinals to run it back, I love tacking McBride onto that. But I just wanted to add some depth to my tight end room with that one there.
I think that's sharp. I think that's a great little pick there. And especially if you do wait, listen, like Darren Waller, you got him at pick 90. That I would consider that waiting on tight end. He's one of the last
Yeah.
tiers. And with the camp narratives, I see his ADP slowly creeping up. But as of right now, that's a fantastic value. From a tournament perspective, Chris, first of all, how much do you value / I'm going to put in quotations here, force the stack with players?
I do try to force the stacks because especially like you're basically, I know we've talked about this before, but it's essentially 4 uncorrelated DFS tournaments that we're playing here. There's the 14-week tournament that leads to the playoffs. Then you got to beat generally 12 teams week 15 to advance, beat 12 teams week 16 to advance, and then week 17, depending on the size of the contest, beat hundreds of teams in the final. So I think you got to have stacks there. Now, I will definitely use it as a tiebreaker, and I even use week 17 as a tiebreaker. But like, I'm making the priority the guys I want. But like, if I have like Daniel Jones, I think is really easy to backstack. Now the beat writers have been all over Waller in camp. And I know everybody looks great in shorts and running against no defense, wearing shorts in June. But like the beat writers can't stop drooling over Waller. And we've seen Darren Waller be a top 3 or 4 tight end in the league. So like if you can get him there, like that's normally kind of the range where I'll only take 2, where it's debatable to take 2 or 3 tight ends. Like if I get a Kelsey or an Andrews or probably a Pitts or a Goddard, I'm almost certainly just taking 2 on underdog where it's only 18 roster spots. And I think they're so like valuable. But Waller and like Njoku now, like if I don't take a ton of Njoku or Freiermuth in that middle range, like if I miss out on like Waller, then I'm kind of punting off. Like I really like the rookies. I know that's kind of been bad historically drafting rookie tight ends in fantasy, but I think this class has a chance to be like an outlier and a little different, especially where a lot of the guys landed. But I'm often just punting off tight ends if anything past Waller and then just going with 3 of them.
Well, and to your point, I mean, it's so cheap to get these giant stacks. Looking here just at ADPs again. So Saquon Barkley is obviously going super early. He's going in early round 2. But then the next Giants player off the board is Darren Waller at 81 ADP right now. This is as of this morning. And Daniel Jones, you get him at 111.
Yeah, I think he's...
Go ahead.
I think he's underrated based on what he did last year and based on the talent they've added around him. I mean, he rushed for over 700 yards, right? Like I think there's a lot of bias built in there where people just think Daniel Jones sucks, think he was overdrafted, but they don't look at the fact that this guy is a legitimate running quarterback. Like just because he doesn't look like your typical running quarterback and he's not a guy that people think is, quote unquote, good at real football, like he still produces like a rushing quarterback for our fantasy purposes. So, and like you said, it's so cheap to backstack. And you could go Hodgins, you could go Hyatt, you could go Paris Campbell, Darius Slayton. Like these guys are free,
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that the next highest wide receiver off the board is the aforementioned Jalen Hyatt. He's going at 153 overall. Frankly, and I know you actually got him in this league. I wouldn't say a full-on fade of Hyatt because that ADP is so cheap you want to get a few shares, but I would much rather take Wan'Dale Robinson, the rookie from last year. I guess he's a sophomore now. He's obviously injured. Paris Campbell, when he was actually healthy last year as a Colt, he looked like the Paris Campbell that we thought he could be.
Yeah.
Darius Slayton is still super cheap. He's basically free at ADP 200. I mean, shit, of all these players, Paris Campbell's going last, and he's got the most experience out of all these guys.
See, I feel like I have a good lean on this one as a Giant fan. So I kind of watch this team closely. I think the slot is very crowded right now, and that's kind of why I haven't been taking a lot of Wan'Dale based on his ADP. You have Wan'Dale, you have Paris Campbell. They re-signed Sterling Shepard. They brought in, who was with the Bills, the slot receiver that was at the Bills and the Jets. I'm blanking on his name.
Crowder?
Yes, they brought in Jamison Crowder as well. So that's 4 guys. I mean, he might not even make the team, but that's 4 guys kind of fighting for that slot role. Whereas I think Hodgins and Slayton are pretty much locked in on the outside, and Hyatt's going to be that kind of the situational deep threat. So I think I like Paris Campbell, who's running ahead. Wandale's working his way back from injury.
Mhm.
Like they're both going to have their games, but for me, those guys are more DraftKings picks at full PPR on a full PPR site than on Underdog. But like Slayton's free in the 18th round. You could get Paris Campbell absolutely goes undrafted more often than not. And Wandale's gonna he could they put more draft capital into him than any other receiver. They took him in the 7th round, but he's
Mhm.
coming off an injury and that slot is crowded. So he's not someone I'm getting a lot on Underdog. I'm getting a little more on DraftKings where he's cheap as well.
Yeah, I think I was just a little soft on, excuse me, on Jalen Hyatt just throughout the rookie process for all the dynasty degens, and that's a problem. Sometimes you have to kind of take off your rookie lens and see, okay, what's the
Yeah.
context of the team that he fell in. But for my dynasty, I'm not really getting a lot of Jalen Hyatt. He's going a little bit too early for my blood, so I'll probably have to get a few more shares as I do it. But I mean, listen, at 153 overall, like you're not going to go wrong if you're picking,
No,
frankly, any of these guys, which I
that
love.
reminds me of a quick dynasty follow up. I wanted to sneak in here after listening to you and
Mhm.
Flex Matt talk on the last podcast. I was surprised as a Seattle fan how down he seemed to be on JSN this year.
Listen,
Because
Chris,
I
I
like
don't get it.
listening to what fans of a team say. 'Cause I think, you follow it closer, like for better or worse. Maybe
Yeah,
it involves some
absolutely.
biases, but I do feel like I've hit higher, like on a higher percentage on my Giants takes than probably any other team because I know the team
Well,
inside out.
yeah,
So that's why,
absolutely.
and I obviously there's a lot of competition there for targets with JSN, but like I don't know. I think he's a beast. I want to try to lean more on like the talent than the situation. I think we're better at predicting talent, like what's going to translate at the next level than the situation. So
Yeah, so JSN was definitely my wide receiver one in this class. And so right now, so we do have a rookie rankings over at dfsarmy.com. I have Jameer Gibbs ranked ahead of JSN simply because
yeah,
I feel like in Dynasty, from a value perspective, you can get more from from Jameer Gibbs this year. He's worth more this year. And we definitely have to take a value. You have to take next year or this current year's season more into your evaluations of these players, in my opinion. So I get where Matt's coming from, but I agree, man. I mean, like no further than the player like AJ Brown, where situations can change very, very quickly,
very quickly.
right?
And if you listen to what like Garrett Wilson and
Oh,
Olave both came right in the league and dominated, and they both say to a man that JSN's better. So
yeah. Well, there was a controversial trade. So I'm actually in a rookie draft right now with both Flex Matt and our guy Brandon, who's on the show as well.
yeah,
And they straight up. So this was after the players were drafted. Chris, get this. I hope you're sitting down. Matt straight up. So he drafted JSN and picked
yeah,
something like 1.6 or something like that. Jordan Addison fell to like the 1.9, 1.10. They did a straight up player swap. They just traded the picks
for no
after the players were
additional
drafted.
value.
No, it's because Matt's doubling down on his cockamamie take that Jordan Addison's going to be a better player long term than JSN. Which, listen, I love Jordan Addison. He's my number 2 in this class. I feel like after
Yeah.
those two guys, there is a definitive tier break. But straight up, man, I'm taking JSN 10 times out of 10. And hey, man, I guess you gotta put it all in at
I'm
this
only
point.
in one. I'm only in one dynasty league. It's Brandon's in it. It's Alan Seslowski's league,
Oh yeah,
and
of course.
I'm sitting at 6. And so I think the obvious pick is JSN. But here's my little
Yeah.
dilemma. It's a super flex, and I have both Herbert and Lamar. So it's like, could I talk myself into Quentin Johnson or Zay? Like, I don't think stacking isn't as important in a dynasty league or like a seasonal league as it is in best ball or DFS. So I'm thinking just going with the talent JSN. What would you do?
Dude, you got to go with the talent. Go with JSN, man. You have to go with JSN. Um, I'm again, I don't hate Quentin Johnston. Depending on where I was picking, I have him third in that second tier, so behind Zay Flowers, and but I would have a really hard time choosing him above a player like JSN. Uh, Tyler Lockett, he's a beast, but he's getting older and
Yeah,
he has had injuries in the past. DK Metcalf, same deal, man. Just that big body that he has. He is generally he's healthy, but he's not always healthy, right? Takes one little situation and then JSN's the absolute man. And then come week 8, 9, 10, you're saying, why the hell did I take this player? Now, obviously, the argument for Quentin Johnston is same thing, buried on the depth chart, but two older players, both with past histories of injury. So I get it, but I wouldn't do it, man. Don't overthink it. Go
Nah,
JSN, get sick.
that's the plan. And the only chance I wouldn't is if Gibbs, if the dude drafting at 5 wanted JSN, then Gibbs fell to me. Then I think I'd just happily take Gibbs. But
Yeah, of course. Of course, you have to take
otherwise,
Gibbs.
JSN.
Yeah, I mean, with quarterbacks like that in a super flex, I mean, you're going to be, even if your depth isn't fantastic, you're going to be competing every single year because of the difference those elite end quarterbacks will make every day. But this isn't, Chris. This isn't a dynasty show. We got to get back to the
we got
best
off
ball
tracks.
talk,
Yes,
baby.
let's do it.
Here's the
Let's
thing.
do it.
We could talk dynasty all day. I love dynasty. It's the beautiful game, I think, when it comes to these DFS or the fantasy football sports. But let's talk a little bit about, you hinted about that week 17 correlation, and I think that is important for our users to understand. And so, do you mind just talk about why week 17 is important and why you think correlating different game stacks for week 17, even though, to your point, you have to get through 1 to 14, week 15 and 16 to even be in the contest. Why are you looking so closely at week 17?
Well, because you just have to look at the payout. Like, these contests are so top heavy. So like, if you like, especially on Underdog, like the Best Ball Millions or the DraftKings, their $10 milli maker, you're playing over 1,000 teams. So
Mm-hmm.
you need to not only get there, you need to go on a run, and then you're kind of treat it like a DFS tournament. You want to be correlated. You're not going to. How often does a completely uncorrelated like DFS lineup take down the millionaire maker or take down a large field tournament? So but I go with it as a tiebreaker. I think I made some mistakes last year where I think and it could just be, like looking at the results based, but like one of my biggest stances was Kelsey. Like I thought Mahomes, you could get Mahomes for a good period last summer in the 4th or 5th round, and I thought Kelsey was just a smash relative to all the other tight ends, as proved to be true. So every time I got like a pick in the second half of the first round, I would go Kelsey and then try to get Mahomes 4th or 5th. But I weighed a lot of those teams down with bad Denver run backs. Like I had a ton of Javonte Williams, which, you could just say I ran bad, but I took, like, anytime it was a choice, let's say Javonte Williams or Nick Chubb, I was going Javonte Williams with this Kelsey teams. Now, is that good process? I'm not totally sure. Like, I think I think if I have a hard player take that's not the week 17 stack, and I'm going to go with my hard opinion on the player. But if all things are equal, and especially like late in the draft where we're kind of throwing darts anyway, like I definitely want that week 17 correlation.
So people need to remember how bullish, not just you, Chris, the entire fantasy industry was on the Denver Broncos last year. They were just a quarterback away, man. It was going to be Cortland Sutton season. I remember, man. Like there were trade offers where like I had players like Brandon Ayuk, and then talking dynasty here, where I'm like, no. If I'll sell you Brandon Ayuk. I need to keep Cortland Sutton because Cortland Sutton's going to be a stud this year. He's going to help me win the league this year. And then he absolutely busted. Jerry Jeudy, yes, he had a good second half of the year, but generally speaking, a disappointment, right? You probably weren't even in contention at that stage in your season-long leagues. Javonte Williams, listen, it's an injury. You can't predict those, right? So I guess maybe the lesson is just diversification. You do so many drafts, maybe get a few Nick Chubb shares, and I mean, you can't kick yourself for that, but at least you learn from it. Let's talk about the quarterbacks a little bit, because you did hint that I think now I'm starting to mess up whether this was before the show or just as we were starting, but the quarterbacks are starting to fall in these underdog drafts. And listen, we start drafting early, Chris, and you kind of have to ride the wave sometimes with these ADPs, but to really win these big tournaments, you have to visualize where you think these players are going to be drafted, say end of August, what's that, the closing line ADP versus where they're being currently drafted. And so right now we're starting to see these ADPs of these quarterbacks shift. And I'm curious to see, like, at what point are you comfortable taking some of these elite guys? Because to your point, like we got Patrick Mahomes going now late round 2, and you see Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts falling to early round 3.
I'm getting it on Josh Allen and Hurts now.
Yeah.
I'll go because I remember pretty much the whole draft season. The choice was, are you going to stack those guys with their first round pass catchers? Because it just matched up evenly. Like if you took
Yeah.
Kelsey, you would take Mahomes in the second. If you took Diggs, you would take Allen in the second. If you took AJ Brown, you would take, Hurts in the second. But
Hmm.
I think the only reason Mahomes isn't falling now is because now that we know week 17, a lot of times the guy who took Chase will take Mahomes in the second as well. So he's the one that's kind of kept his value. Whereas I
Hmm.
would say almost every draft I've done the last week or two, Josh Allen's gone in the mid third. And I have been unlucky to be able to pair Diggs with him. Most of the time, someone will snipe me right before, but I've seen a lot of people do it. Like a lot of people are getting that third round Josh Allen paired with Diggs. And then I think that's just why not? Like at that point, like it even saves you a roster spot because then you don't have to draft a third quarterback. That's one more dart throw you could
Hmm.
take late at running back or wide receiver. And same with Hurts. Like here's a cool thing that I've done a couple times.
Okay.
If let's say you get um, drafting from like the 4 spot or the 3 spot, you got like McCaffrey or Tyreek Hill or someone like that, Cooper Cup. Then you take Devontae Smith late second. No one on that turn is going to want to take an unstacked Hurts generally. So you could almost always, I've done it probably 3 or 4 times in the last week, get Hurts in the early third if you have an early third round pick. So then you've got one stud, whether it's McCaffrey or Hill or Cup, and then you've got the Devontae Smith Hurts stack, and then you could maybe jump. You might have to jump a couple picks of ADP, but just you're going to get Goddard too if you want. It's not hard to make that double stack at all. So that's one of my favorite things to do right now.
So you'll almost like play like a little bit of game theory here. You'll say
Yeah,
I dare you. I
I
dare you
dare
to
you
take
to
an
take an
unstacked
unstacked
Hurts.
Hurts.
Yeah.
And most people won't do it. Like a lot of people do that too with Burrow because it especially works well with the quarterbacks that don't run. So
Yeah.
like no one wants an unstacked Burrow that knows what they're doing. No one wants an unstacked Tua. So if you take Chase and Higgins and you go Chase Higgins, you could push Burrow back to I see him go to the 5th round sometimes. Like I've done it and then taken him in the 4th and then at like late 4th. And then I'll judge basically, is there someone I want really bad with that late 4th round pick that I'll risk someone might snipe me on Burrow on the 4 or 5
Hmm.
turn there. But if it's someone that I don't love, I'll just lock up Burrow there late 4th, basically at ADP or a little worse, or I'll push it to the 5th. And I've gotten some 5th round Burrow. So and you could do it with Tua and Waddle as well. Like those guys will fall, the non-running QBs. People don't want them unstacked. So you could kind of force the board a little bit.
Yeah, so right now Joe Burrow is going at pick 46, which is just the back end of the 4th. So you could
4th, yeah.
absolutely, if you ended up like legitimately, if you go Jamar Chase at pick 3, and then you
Yeah.
go and you choose, say T Higgins even around 2, a little ahead of his ADP, and then you come back in round 4, like that's a very legitimate stack. That's sharp, man.
Yeah, I've been doing that. The tough thing with that is that how do you run back KC? Because that KC's tricky this
Tough.
year.
Yeah.
Like you could have is Hopkins going to go there? That seems to be like the Adam Schefter rumor that it could be a destination. And I think
Who
I
knows?
loved Kadarius Toney as a talent, but I think he's being massively overdrafted where he is. Like
Yeah.
he's not what is he like a 6th or 7th round pick right now?
Kadarius Toney right now. I'm glad you asked because I will look right now. He's going to pick 72 overall. So
Okay.
yeah, that's right at the 6-7 turn.
I don't think he's going to finish in that like area
No.
value wise. He's either going to well exceed that and be a guy we're taking in the 3rd or 4th round next year, or he's just going to have the normal hamstring flare ups and like be a guy that should be going in the 13th round. Like that's a dice roll. You're just blowing the dice with Kadarius Toney. But there's other guys around that I think are a lot safer bets. Like I guess it just depends on how you want to draft. Like I'm fine with
Yeah.
any Kansas.
Well, who would you rather take? Would you rather take Treylon Burks, who's going right before him, or
I
Kadarius Toney?
would like in a vacuum, Traylon Burks every time. Like
What
I
about
think
George
Burks
Pickens?
Pickens every time.
Pickens?
But the only place time I'm taking Traylon Burks there is with the Mahomes or as a run back to Cincinnati. Like I'll be underweight on Tony. Like I'll take him
Mhm.
with Mahomes or in a Cincy run back. But other than that, just Burks and Pickens all day. I think those guys I think they give you the same upside with a lot safer floor.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just going back to where DeAndre Hopkins could fall. Obviously, he mentioned the Bills. Obviously, he mentioned the Kansas City Chiefs. Both those teams don't have a ton of cap space. Now, I get you can get creative, but
Yeah,
I believe it's tomorrow on Sunday. He's scheduled to go meet. This is Hopkins meet the Titans. He's also
Titans.
now
Yeah,
scheduled to go talk to the Patriots. So, I mean, we talked like, yes, it'd be fantastic to go to all these potential championship caliber teams, but can they afford them? And will
he's
he
gonna
have a
want the
real?
money.
Yeah, he
I
wants
think
the
his
money. Why
decision's
not?
going to come down to money, and he's getting late in his career. I think he's going to want a last big check. So we'll
Yeah,
see
it
whoever
makes
can give
sense.
him the. I mean, I obviously I don't know. I'm speculating, but that would be my guess.
It's so tough to know what's going on in these guys' head, man. Like he's from an individual player perspective, I feel like he's got nothing else to prove, right, in terms of his career. And really, what is he lacking? It's the championship. So it's not my money, I suppose, right? But to say if he
The
can make say 10, 11 million bucks, and I guess like he looks across over at Baltimore, says, what the hell? Like you guys just paid Odell
Yeah,
Beckham just an
Odell's
insane
contract is screwing up everything in the receiver market. It's kind of
pretty
wild that
much.
he got $15 million. In our draft, we did that poodle draft. That was like the
Yep.
one pick. I never take Odell. I think Odell is like overpriced, but I
Yeah.
missed on Zay, I missed on Bateman, so I was like, I wanted some piece of the Lamar stack. And I hate the receivers in that range. I've heard other people say this too, but I think there's a wide receiver dead zone like this year. Like I think
Yeah.
everything like after like Bateman and like Elijah Moore there, like all the way down to like Hyatt and like Mingo, like the kind of hopeful upside rookies. There's so much like crap in there that I don't want to deal with, like the Juju's, like
Yeah.
Odell. Like I hate that like round like 8 through like 11 or 12 for receivers. Like I just every time I get there, I'm like, there's not a single receiver on the board I like.
Yeah, so I have my players tiered here, and I have like a tier 10 here, and that includes players like Rashad Bateman, Brandon Cooks. I've got the rookies Zay Flowers, Quentin Johnson. I've even got Cortland
Yeah,
Sutton in there. But after that, to your point, like Jameson Williams,
there's
who I've got him in as like the top guy in tier 11, but there's Jameson Williams, Juju, very little upside. Elijah Moore. I mean, if Hop goes there, he's
then
eviscerated.
yeah,
Odell
exactly.
Beckham. Yeah, that's kind of a nasty tier. And I mean, that's at Reddit 94, right? So um that's an interesting part of the draft because that's when you can start taking a bit of a shot on some of these running backs.
The
Like
running
Devon A.
backs.
Chain's there, Rashad Penny's in that range, Samaje P. Ryan's in that range. So that's definitely an area where you can pivot, especially if you go let's call it hero RB and you
Yeah.
really want to build up that RB depth. That's definitely a sweet spot. Let's speaking of kind of this later rounds, looking at your exposures. When I look at your high exposed players,
Yeah.
it just makes sense. It's these guys typically going in later rounds. But let's talk about your quarterback exposure because the guy right at the top of those lists, we already talked about one of the guys. We got Daniel Jones, who's your second most owned man, or I don't want to say owned, but second most rostered
Yep.
quarterback at 19% of your drafts. But Anthony Richardson, the phenom himself, the Indianapolis Colts rookie quarterback. You've got Anthony Richardson. He's your highest exposed quarterback at 23% of your drafts. Why are you going so hard on Anthony Richardson?
I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. It's just it's
Boom.
the rushing upside. Like we've seen like what someone like I could see him having the kind of season that Fields had last year, where he's not
Yep.
really getting you that much as a passer, but he's an absolute, like, as we know, the greatest athletic testing quarterback ever. All the
Mm,
reports coming out of camp have been sterling. And I like that Shane Steichen, that's his name, I believe, right? The new coach there, who was the offensive coordinator in Philly, knows how
mhm.
to tailor that offense around like a Jalen Hurts type. Now, will he put in the like Hertz is known to have like the best work ethic, just being like the smartest, hardest
Yep.
working, like highest character guy, like QB type in the league, and was willing and improved greatly because of that. But I think we don't know if that is Richardson. Everybody seems to love the kid, but I think they have a great offensive line there. They have talent around him. I think he's going to have like I think he gives you upside at that point in the draft that not any other quarterbacks really do. So, like, if you miss out on like the high end quarterbacks, he's my favorite default option to be like, who is going to outdo these guys in week 17? Who can possibly put up a score that beats Mahomes, that beats Allen, that beats Hurts, or at least is close enough? relative to where you drafted him, that you have a chance at taking down a big tournament. So he's a guy that I'm getting overweight there.
Well, and to your point about the tournament play, I mean, typically we see an arc for the first season with these rookies, right? And guess what? Week 17, assuming he stays healthy, like that's where hopefully he's going to be hitting a stride. And the thing that I like is that the Colts, listen, I would say the Colts underperformed last year, right? Going into
Oh,
last
for
year,
sure.
obviously they had a lot of injuries they had to deal with. Matt Ryan is, I mean, he's not on the team right now for a reason. They underperformed, but I think the team itself is better than they would expect. Hopefully their offensive line can actually stay healthy. But I mean, Michael Pittman's going to be solid. He's got Alec Pierce, who was a rookie from last year, so he's a sophomore this year. They went and they got Josh Downs, who was one of my favorite rookies. It's just an
Yeah.
absolute jitterbug out there. And there's a real opportunity here when you look at just even past years, like who are these guys going right in our range past years? Justin Fields a few years ago or last year, Lamar Jackson a few years ago. That's how
Yep.
if you hit on those late, call it right around round 8, 9, 10, those
Yep.
quarterbacks, those are the guys that can really differentiate the league, because any given week, Anthony Richardson could score as much as a Patrick Mahomes, as a Jalen Hurts in a given week with that rushing upside. Absolutely love that. Of course, we already talked about Daniel Jones and just his upside. I feel like that's a sweet spot as well. Massive upside, a player that could put up 35 points in a week. That's a Daniel Jones.
We've seen him do it. He did it in week 17 last year. And with the Indy
Yeah.
guys, they play the Raiders indoor week 17. Like, I think the Raiders are going to be a dumpster fire this year. Like, they've already got if
Yeah.
Jimmy's ankle that they apparently had to unguarantee his contract or whatever for, if that doesn't hold up, they're looking at Brian Hoyer and like the rookie from Purdue, like what's his name, like that team is not.
Aiden
And I don't
McConnell.
think they're.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Aiden McConnell. Yeah.
I think their head coach is a disaster. I think that franchise just is a mess. And so like if that could be an opportunity where I could see Indy being like kind of on the verge of the playoff hunt and just like really showing out in a dome against the Raiders week 17. I mean, that's obviously speculative, like we're making assumptions, but these are the little tiebreaker things I'm using when trying to draft a team that has a chance to win a tournament. And another thing, JT, like why is JT going in the mid to late second round now? Like I'm getting a ton of him lately. Like
Yeah.
we've seen him be the best player in fantasy football not that long ago. And I'm willing to kind of throw last season out because, like, as you described, they had like Jeff Saturday walk in off the ESPN set with no coaching experience. That they were a mess. Like, if they just have a competent program this year, I think that's a team that could exceed their expectations. So I'm buying a lot of Indy.
I think one of the reasons that managers are hesitant to draft him in round 1 is because, one, I mean, he had the injury last year, so he's coming off an injured season, but also just the fact that historically JT wasn't really known for his pass catching ability. And now with a run first rookie quarterback like Anthony Richardson, he's likely going to tuck the ball and run versus pass it off to JT.
Yeah.
So I could see that, right? Maybe people don't think that he's got that
I
upside,
think that's
but
the reasoning behind it. And they think that Richardson's going to steal some touchdowns, which he will. But I
yeah.
still think just JT is efficient enough behind that line that he's going to more than justify his second round price. Like I think we're going to be looking back at this like midway through the season and be like, wow, how did I get this guy? Like I got him at pick 20 in a draft the other day. Like that seems like, and his ADP is 16. So it's not like that's even that big of a fall. Like we're going to be looking at it like, why was he going so late?
There's one word for that, Chris, and that's cockamamie. It's cockamamie.
Yeah, I'm with you,
really,
bro.
really interesting. So I listen to a lot of podcasts, and one of my must listens to is always the JJ Zachariason podcast.
Yeah,
and he
really
recently talked about just the difference between like ranking these players and where they perform when you look at, say, like a 0.5 PPR versus a full PPR, right?
Yeah.
And obviously Underdog is a half PPR, whereas DraftKings is full. And people forget that. Like it's a half point PPR. There's more emphasis on scoring touchdowns. And when close your eyes, picture at the end of the season, there's maybe a handful of players that can get 20 total touchdowns. Not Jameson or not Mr. Williams, obviously from from Detroit last year, but like Jonathan Taylor is definitely in that conversation as a player with at the end of the season. Yeah, of course JT is going to get 20 touchdowns. He's Jonathan freaking Taylor, right?
Look what Miles Sanders did in this offense last year with Steichen at calling the plays. Like Miles Sanders is no JT. So
No,
I
no,
I
absolutely
love
not.
him in the second round. I'm gonna have a ton of second round JT.
Yeah, I think that's really sharp. And then just to put a bow on your quarterbacks here, your third most rostered is Justin Fields. So, Chris, I think you got to type. I think you got to
That
type.
that's the DFS Army thing. Like we attack
Yeah,
running quarterbacks. Like I feel like the geek has that like tattooed across his chest or something like that.
yeah.
We've been preaching that for years and it's worked. So why go
Well,
away from it?
especially in listen, I mean they have safe floors and massive ceilings, obviously, but especially in tournament plays where you want those spike weeks where you can get like literally a 35 to a 40 point game into your quarterback, like that's going to help you advance. And a key difference between these tournament plays versus say like just a standard 12-person underdog draft where that's not a tournament is that in those styles every single week is equal, right? So
Yep.
if you're going to go and get one of those more conservative quarterbacks, like I don't know, say you decide to wait on Kirk Cousins, that's
Yep.
pretty consistent every single week because every single week that matters. But to win these tournaments, you need spike week potential. And really, I mean, how often do you see quarterbacks throw for 5 touchdowns? It's not very often, right? It's more
You
likely a
can't count
quarterback's going
on
to
it.
throw. No, it's more likely he's going to throw for one, rush for two, and get another like 1,200 or 120 yards on the ground. Like that's how you're going to win these tournaments. So I like that. Let's move on to some of the other positions here, Chris. Let's talk about the running back position. So you looks like you've got a lot of exposure to these rookies, and it's hard to tell. I mean, I guess this would all be post draft, but you've
Yeah,
got
this is
Chase
post draft.
Brown, and again, all
I
these guys are relatively cheap. So you've got a
yeah.
fair amount of exposure to Chase Brown. Then you've got Devon A. Chain, and then your third is Zach Charbonnet. So let's talk about Chase Brown to start.
Well, he's a guy that I've liked in the pre-draft process a lot. Like he was super productive at Illinois, and then he
Mhm.
crushed the combine. Like he tested phenomenally. And I just read an article. I wish I could quote who wrote it, but I read an article about basically describing him as like the running back version of Jalen Hurts, of like just a
Hmm.
dude who gets it, like first guy in the building, last guy to leave, like keeps a notebook, like written up what he wants to accomplish at the next day's practice every day. Like they are super impressed with this kid's makeup. And if he has the production, he has the testing. I know he doesn't have the draft capital, but and plus I'm not a mixing guy. Like I know a lot of smart people are. So I think there's an opportunity, and I'm not definitely not a Travion Williams guy. I think there's an opportunity for him to climb the depth chart. So like I like taking stances in like, the late in the 16th round. Like if I get 30% Chase Brown and he busts, like that's not sinking my team. It's that's not going to ruin my season. So like as my fifth or sixth running back. So I that's a guy that I just believe in the talent. I believe in the offense. So I'm just going to take a stance there, like on him particularly.
Let's talk about Chase Brown a little bit. So he's a little bit older. He's 23 years old.
Yeah,
He did the extra year because of the COVID year. He's a Canadian boy. I don't know if you knew that. So
I did
obviously
not know
respect
that. There
respect
you
to
go.
Chase Brown. If you ever have a chance, like listen to an interview. Sharp kid. I
Yeah,
heard him get interviewed a few times during the Senior Bowl week. Super sharp kid. Just somebody you really want to cheer for. To your point, he got I would say later round capital at 5.28, but
5.
in
Yeah,
today's NFL, it's really like the round 5 is really around 4 nowadays, right?
yeah, it is
Um,
totally.
what I like though is that when you look at just his size, so he's 5'10", 209 pounds. The kid has 10-inch hands, man. Like those are just
Yeah,
banana hands, which is
yeah,
amazing. His college target share was 8.2%, which is pretty solid, and his college yards per carry was 5 yards per carry. One of the issues was he was noted as being a weak pass blocker, but pretty much every rookie running back,
yeah.
with very rare exceptions, they always need to work on their pass blocking because in college they're not asked to do that, right? So
No,
it's a skill that they're going to need to work on, which is fine. But I would say if they're going to be using him, especially in like the passing game and third downs, that was one of the reasons they always like people would be screaming like, why is Samaje Perine on the field right now on third down when it's an important first down you need to get like in the Super
yeah,
Bowl? Because guess what? He's a way better pass blocker.
yeah. Apparently
So
Mixon sucks at pass blocking. But
yeah, exactly. So that's one thing he definitely needs to work on if he wants to be able to get playing time. But again, with the upside, I don't expect. Listen, I'm not a lawyer, but I don't. If there is going to be a suspension, I wouldn't expect it this year for Joe Mixon. We've seen how the whole Alvin Kamara thing is playing out.
playing out,
Dude's
yeah.
still not suspended. They still
Yeah,
haven't
that's
ruled on Alvin
weird. I don't
Kamara.
know what to
Like,
make of that situation. Like I haven't been taking him. Just I trend against the older guys anyway when I draft,
Yeah.
so I haven't been taking much Kamara at all. But who knows? Like that's one of those things where it's like I'm assuming there's going to be a 4 to 6 game suspension, but that's just a guess. We're all just guessing at this point.
I have a question for you, Chris. If you were at a work event, because that's what he was at, he was at a
Yeah.
work event, got into a fight on camera, kicking a guy when he's down, and then there's pictures afterwards of this guy just the crap eaten out of him. Like to me, that's I don't care what the legal process is. There's a smoking
Yeah.
gun over here. Like
Yeah.
there needs to be discipline.
Yeah. And
So it's
there
gonna happen.
probably will be. Yeah.
It's shocking. But then the Joe Mixon thing's a lot more murky.
It is. I don't think there's the
So
smoking gun like you
yeah,
referred to in that.
no. So I would say it's a safe bet for Joe Mixon. But then again, he's also been injured, right? And you want to get pieces of this offense because, to your point, if Joe goes down, it's going to be wide open. Joe Mixon, that is, it's going to be wide open to see who's going to step up, and Chase Brown certainly has that opportunity. Now, the other player I want to talk to you about is Devon Achane, because he's your second most rostered player, and it's kind of funny. We were joking that so Devon Achane, of course, was drafted by Miami, pretty much the nut spot for the draft in terms of like a smaller player. But I mean, ironically or coincidentally, your one player, Alexander Madison, who you got in this tournament, he's going to be buoyed by Dalvin Cook leaving. But there's a lot of talk about Dalvin going to Miami. He's from Miami. And how would that worry you about Devon Achane, or do you feel like that doesn't really change the narrative based on what the projected role is?
It changes it a little bit, but I don't think it changes it as much as people might assume. Because I think Devon Achane, you're not betting on him due to volume. He's like world-class track runner, and who I think Mike McDaniel will be able to get in space and pop some big plays with. So I'm only counting on him for like 10 touches a game. And I think he's going to have some, better in best ball, like spike week games where he busts those 50-yard runs. He busts those 50-yard screens. I think what Cook will basically cut into the Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert role, I think more.
Yeah.
I think he kind of kills those guys a lot more than he kills Achane. Like obviously as an Achane owner, I don't want Dalvin Cook going there, but I also think it might create a bit of a buying opportunity because I think Achane will drop 3 or 4 rounds, put signs there, and then I'll still get shares on the cheap, just knowing that he can pop off the big play at any point. And
yeah, I mean, so the issue with Devon Achane, for those who aren't as familiar with the rookie class, he's a little bit smaller. He's 5'9", 188 pounds, and historically, when you have these running backs under 200 pounds, that's kind of that Mendoza line. We really like closer to like 210, 215 minimum.
Yeah.
But Devon Achane, I mean, in that Mike McDaniel offense, it's like, to me, that's a really good fit. College target share 14.7%. The guy knows how to catch the ball, so absolutely explosive. I agree with you there. Speeding up a little bit just because we still got a lot to talk about. The last guy I do want to mention, though, your highest, or well, look at that, JT's 21% managed there, but the guy just above him is Aaron Jones. Are you a little bit worried about that Green Bay offense, or to your point earlier, you think that Jordan Love's going to be at least good enough to manage it, and Aaron Jones is still going to maintain some value?
Yeah, that's basically the way I'm looking at it. Like, and I've taken a lot of Aaron Jones when I have like a Minnesota guy. When I have Justin, he pairs nicely as like I want to do the run back with Justin Fields there. When I do not Justin Fields, but with Jefferson, when I do get the 1 overall pick, and I just think we've seen what Jones can do, and I don't think he's washed yet. And I think that they're going to concentrate more on the run now with Rodgers out of there. That's what their head coach has always wanted to be, a run first guy. And I think he's got too much. He's too good of a player for where he's going. Like, I think last year we saw this a lot with like Sanders and Josh Jacobs, guys that we knew were good football players that that nobody wanted to draft because they were veterans. They weren't sexy. They were in perceived bad roles. And then they vastly outperformed that. Like, if I'm getting 5th round Aaron Jones, like, I know Aaron Jones is a good football player. And like, what we don't know for sure is how this new offense is going to look under Love. So I think we're getting a bit of a discount there. Like, I don't think he's gonna sink my team. And we've seen him have the capability to bust off those 3 touchdown games on occasion, like that really elevate you if they come at the right time. Like, as a 5th round pick, I like Aaron Jones this year.
Yeah, so Aaron Jones last year, he finished as the RB12 in terms of points per, or fantasy points per week. The thing that kind of stands out to me when I look at goal line rush opportunities. He had one. He had one goal line carry last year, which when you look at all the
Yeah, he
players
lost it
around
to
him,
Dylan.
yeah. So there's that massive just like slate breaking week upside is maybe a little bit limited there, but Aaron Jones, he took a bit of a pay cut to stay in town. Obviously he knew Aaron Rodgers was going to be there, right? The writing was on the wall at that stage when he made that shift. And I agree with you. I think he's a great value there. Let's move on quickly to the wide receiver position. Now, one of the players we talked about, I already said I'm not too high on him, but you seem to like him. Jalen Hyatt, you've got a 42%. Again, that price at right around 150 ADP is super cheap. You also have Josh Downs. Now, that one's interesting to me. Talk to me about Josh Downs. What do you like about him?
He's dirt cheap and he's easy to backstack. Like, because obviously, like you said, my number one quarterback
Yeah,
was AR. So like, I'm
Rich. Yep.
just getting those. I'm getting those cheap stacks. That's him and Hyatt are guys that I'm just stacking with the quarterbacks I take. Like, and because they're free. Like in the, I think Hyatt's like kind of 13th round. Richardson's maybe like 15th, 16th. I mean, not Richardson, Downs. So
Mm-hmm.
like, if I want to double stack those guys where I can cheap. So like, I'm not. I mean, I like those guys as players. Like you were talking about how you like Downs in the pre-draft process, and
Yep.
Hyatt won the Bolitnikov Award. I know it was in a bit of a gimmicky offense, but I
Yeah.
trust Brian Daboll, especially late in the season, to find a way to make use of his down the field talent. So like I'm getting those guys dirt cheap, and they work in my stacks. So that's really why I'm high on that.
So I just like we're so into this fantasy football space, Chris, be it Dynasty, be it DFS. Like we've been doing DFS. We've been doing best balls literally since February. Like
Yeah.
it's a sickness, it really is.
Yeah.
But for those of you who are still just like you're starting to jump into it, it's still only June. It's still very very early in the fantasy football calendar. Just go to YouTube. Just Google Josh Down highlights. Like just if you want to just get sick, just watch this guy play. The man, he's a little bit smaller, which is why I think he fell in the draft.
Yeah.
He looking back, he has that upside to be the best wide receiver in his class. He legitimately does. I like the fact that you're pairing him with Anthony Richardson. The thing that worries me a little bit is that one of the things that Anthony Richardson did struggle with in college was just those short to intermediate
Sure.
passes. He
Yeah.
was a beast at the deep ball, but I think that that's something that they're continuing to work on right now in OTAs. So I think that's for the price. It's super, super cheap. And then you got Jonathan Mingo. Now, I'm a little cold on Jonathan Mingo. I'm just, in general, through the process, I feel like he was elevated just because of where he went to college at Ole Miss.
Yeah.
He obviously was drafted by Carolina to be paired up with Bryce. And you do have a fair amount of exposure with Bryce. You got 16% exposure with Bryce, 25% Mingo. So it kind of makes sense. Tell me about that.
I just think that those are same thing. It's like value where they're going. Like Bryce
Mm-hmm.
goes super late. And so like he's a guy that I think pairs nicely with like the elite quarterback. So on builds where I have Hurts or I have Josh Allen or Fields or Lamar or somebody like that,
Mm-hmm.
just pair him with like a super late Bryce is someone who I think he's not gonna like he's not going to put up massive numbers, I don't think, as a rookie, but he's going to be a guy that's going to give you a competent score each week and fill in nicely as a cheap QB2 with an elite option. So that's why I've been taking him there, and I think Mingo is probably might be a tad overpriced, but I think I'm looking for guys that could potentially break out in that range.
Yeah.
Like I'd rather try like take a chance with Mingo and be wrong than just like go with the dusty veteran like Odell or
Yeah.
whoever, someone that we've seen fail before. Like maybe I'm wrong with Mingo, and like I I don't have a super strong like player take on him, but I just
Yep.
more of just where he's going and using him in stacks. Like, and plus I like him when I try to run it back with any Jacksonville guys too, because that's the
Mm-hmm.
week 17 matchup there. So if you got like a Ridley Lawrence stack, like throw Mingo in there and hope that he's the guy that gets it late.
Well, just looking at a lot of these players, you've got a lot of rookies, and it's a safe bet to make because typically, just say the first half of the season, they might not be impactful, right? So that's when you're going to
Yeah.
really, your teams are going to hopefully, they're going to lean on these more experienced players. But come the second half of the season, that's where the rookies will typically take a bit of the ones that are going to break out are often going to break out in the second half of the season. So banking on these players to have big weeks in these important work weeks to advance into the tournament and obviously week 17 I think is huge, so I can't fault you for that. Fair amount of exposure to JSN as well. You got 21% exposure, love that. I'll be honest, I'm a little soft on him versus where he's going in ADP. He's going right around 60. I've got him baked in
Yeah.
right around 70. But that is to say I actually have a fair amount of exposure to him just because early on, I wanted to get as much JSN as I could because the talent is just, you can't deny it.
Yeah, and the reports have been like glowing out of camp
Oh,
and JSN.
just
Like
like, oh my God.
I know you gotta take everything that comes out this year with the great, like this time of year with the grain of salt, but like they love what they're seeing out of JSN right now. So
He's a stud, man. He is
yeah,
the real deal. He needs to stay healthy. He missed most of the last season because of an injury, most of the last college season because of injury, but the kid is a stud. Let's touch quickly on your tight ends. Similar story here, people. Tell me if you heard this one before. Rookie Michael Mayer, rookie Sam Laporta, rookie Dalton Kincaid, Trey McBride, cheap Chika Kwankwo. Seems like you are a bit of a trash man when it comes to these
oh
late tight
yeah,
ends.
this I'm punting off tight end for the most part
Yeah,
this year. Like it's tough to do the Kelsey Mahomes thing is so expensive right now. That's your
yeah,
first 2 round picks, and then like it's almost where they're going, the pockets they're going. It's very hard to stack Andrews and Lamar without like jumping and giving up a lot of ADP. So like once you get past those first few guys, Hawk is expensive. Like he goes a round or two ahead of Pitts and Goddard, who I think are decent values. I don't mind getting, but after that, and like we talked about Waller. But once you get past those guys, it's like I just like to fire out like these late darts and just like hope to hit something. Like yeah, I think you could hit it with volume. I'm taking a lot of 3 tight end builds. I like the rookies. I think Laporta's in a great spot.
yes.
I love Chiga Conquo. Like he had, I think what it was, his yards per route run was, I think, better than everybody, any tight end in the league aside from Kelsey last year. I
Yeah.
know he didn't run a ton of routes, but he's a guy that I think has upside talent relative to where he's going. People like, and I think Mayer, it's weird because this was a guy that was like, quoted like the baby Gronk, like was so
Yeah.
hyped up coming out of college and then fell a little bit in the draft because he didn't test like off the charts. And a
Yeah.
lot of times the best tight ends don't. Like if you look like historically, like Kelsey didn't test crazy. Like Zach Ertz was a great fantasy tight end for years. He didn't test crazy. Witten's going to the Hall of Fame. He runs like your dad, like pushing the mower. But like I think, and I've also got a lot of Michael Mayer because as kind of the week 17 correlation to all those indie guys I'm drafting.
Yeah.
Like I think he's a dirt cheap way to have like a run back there at a position that I think is soft, just like, and I think he's going to play like he's going to be the starting tight end from the jump. Like Jimmy G, has been known to pepper the tight end if you look at the way
Yeah.
he went to Kittle. So I think he's going too late. He's a guy that I really like.
Yeah, I think the narrative with Michael Mayer is that when you look at this tight end class, he might be the best all around tight end, including
Yeah.
blocking. And I mean, unless you're like a George Kittle or the aforementioned Rob Gronkowski, where you're super hyper efficient, but you can still do the inline blocking. Like that's the kind of player Michael Mayer is going to have to be to really, I think, move the needle from a tight end perspective. But again, when you're taking a shotgun approach, you're just getting a lot of these guys late. I've heard
Yeah.
listening to a few other shows that studied past success. There's been teams that have been successful with the 4 tight end build. Literally, like some of your like the double digit rounds.
I've
You
heard some
just
really sharp
head.
guys talk about that.
Yeah,
4 tight ends seems like
it's
a
hard.
lot in underdog, especially like when with 18, it's only 18 rounds. If you want to do that in DraftKings the thought behind it is that like these guys like Luke Musgrave, who you can get in like the 18th round, he's going to have a role. He's going to be on the team. It's not a dead roster spot. If you're drafting, Justin Ross, like in the 18th round, you maybe believe like I've taken a few stabs at it, but like I'd say there's probably a 75% chance he gets you a 0, doesn't score a point for you
Oh
the
yeah,
whole season. So when you're
yeah.
taking like these, it is the late round receivers and running backs are way more speculative than the tight ends, but 4 of them just seems tough to me. Like I could get it on DraftKings. I can't get there on Underdog though. I think I 3 tight end builds I do a lot of. Like
Mhm.
give me the rookies, give me a Conquo. I don't mind Matt like mixing in a Hayden Hurst type, like who is going to be out there every snap. Conklin, like
Yeah.
we've seen what Rodgers, Pepper tight ends. I don't mind Conklin. There's so many late guys that I think you can mix and match based on your stacks, based on what you've already done. So I'm punting off tight end for the most part this year.
If you don't get an early one, just wait, baby. Hands in
Yep.
the air and just let it ride. Let's
Yep.
listen. We've been talking about it all show, Chris. Let's just talk to the people before we head out here. We'll finish this off with this last segment here. We've talked a lot about week 17 stacking. Let's talk about some of these game stacks that I like. I'm going to name a few. And then if I
All right.
missed any, you let me know. So one of the ones that stands out to me as a sexy game stack is the Lions are playing the Cowboys. That's one I really
Oh, for
like.
sure. Yep.
Lots of fireworks potentially there. You got your Dolphins versus your Ravens. Again, Lamar, just please stay healthy, Lamar, so that this game can be an
Yep.
absolute shootout. I guess same can be said about Tua Tagovailoa. You mentioned the Falcons and the Bears, especially if you've got a Justin Fields. That's fantastic. You get a little Bijan, you get a little Justin Fields, just a rushing bonanza. You talked about the Raiders and the Colts. I think that's more so just because that could be such a dumpster fire from the Las Vegas side
Yep.
that the Colts can put up a lot of points. Of course, the narrative that Anthony Richardson is going to be in fine form at that stage of the season. Another one you mentioned, Eagles, Cardinals, similar thing. You think potentially the Eagles are just going to be able to steamroll the Arizona Cardinals, but you want to get a little bit of Cardinal exposure coming back. And finally on my list I have here, now this is probably going to be one of the marquee games because it's going to be impactful. It's going to be the Bengals at the Chiefs.
Yeah. I mean, I think you hit on most of my favorites there.
Yeah.
Cowboys, Detroit, where you started off, it's indoors, and there's a lot of like late options. I think those are two sneaky late tight ends. Like Ferguson is a tight end that could step up into that space vacated by Schultz. And I love Laporta. Laporta, I know there's a lot of dynasty heads out there who've had their eye on him, but he crushed at Iowa. He was awesome. And then he went to the combine and blew everybody away. Like, and he is just very smooth. Like you watch the way he gets in and out of routes. Like, and Iowa's a tight end factory. He's another one that's, the camp hype is just completely over the moon on, but you could still get him late. Like he's going to be out there, I think, starting from day one. I forget who gave the stat. I listened like you. I listened to so many podcasts, but like Detroit as a team had one of the, I think maybe the second most tight end touchdowns last year. And that was with trading Hawkinson. They had like the fluke three tight end game, touchdown game out of like Brock Wright or like these random dudes. But like, I think Laporta is going to come right in there, especially with JMO out for the first 6 weeks and get really established as a part of that offense. So I love him as like a late part of a Detroit Dallas week 17 stack. And it's very easy to stack that game because you can get, if you get the 12-13, you could just go CD Amon-Ra to start. And then both quarterbacks go dirt cheap. I think Pollard is a value in the second round. Like that's such an easily stackable game. I love that one. And obviously Kansas City, Cincy's has a point. It's probably be the highest total on the board, but like that's tough with where all those guys go. Like it's like you can't stack Kelsey and Chase. Like that's impossible. No one,
it's tough. Yeah, well, yeah, that's impossible. Yeah, that's.
But it's tough. But there's ways to try to get cute with that. We've talked about like I have a hard time with the KC receivers. Like, is Sky Moore going to be worth something? Is Rashee Rice? Is Hopkins going to wind up there? Justin Ross is getting hype as like an 18th round flyer. I like Chase Brown. Some people, I think Irv Smith is kind of a sneaky tight end. So there's a lot of ways to get exposure to that game that doesn't have to be like the full out, like expensive, use your first 4 round picks to try to stack it. So
it's exciting. And listen, these are the types of things you really need to just take shots on, right? If you're going to, especially if you're going to be volume drafting, get exposure to these different parts of games because the fantasy gamers are getting a lot smarter, a lot sharper. And these are the things that they look at, right? The quote sharps. I would consider you a sharp, Chris, because you're a D-gen like that. And that's why I want to have you on the show. So of course, thank you so much, Chris. If you guys want to hit him up on Twitter at Chris Felicetta, the link or the spelling is in the show description below. Loves talking fantasy football, loves just talking fun takes, and he's part of the Underdog Cardio Club. So you see some of his draft boards almost regularly. So you see,
I'm out there running through Central Park. I post them every day. It's kind of, I think you're running out of time to get in the Underdog Cardio Club. There's maybe like a week left to get the drafts in, but like it's amazing. You get $3 back on every one of your Best Ball Mania contests right back. So you get a little bit in shape. I burned a lot of calories running around while drafting.
That's what I was gonna say. Listen, you can when you compare your vices with exercise, I would say that's a win, Chris. So go
Yeah.
check it out. Of course, you guys should go out check out dfsarmy.com. We obviously talk everything fantasy football on this channel, but over at our parent station, DFS Army on YouTube, they talk all about the DFS contests. If you subscribe to the podcast feed, there has been Major League Baseball strategy dropping almost every single day. So there's a ton of content out there, a lot of free content. But of course, where the money's at, Chris, is for our VIP members. That's where you get access to the Discord. You get myself. You can jump in that. You can shout out Chris if you want some best ball advice. We're always talking fantasy football. We're always talking DFS contests. And guess what, Chris?
The pick'em plays on Underdog have been killing it in the Discord too. The Underdog pick'em plays.
We have coaches winning. Like one of our coaches took down a $50,000 tournament the other day. Like we have real members cashing real money every single day. What are you waiting for? DFSarmy.com, DFSarmy.com. I'm Flex Shane, of course. My guy, Chris Felicetta, thanks for jumping on the show. We are the DFS Army Fantasy Football Show. Be safe out there, people.
Big time, knowing that, diamonds in my teeth.